Good morning, viewers. Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Vibhuti. Today, we are going to talk about an issue which is very close to us Indians. In this country, we are all immigrants. We are going to talk about immigration issues, how it affects all of us, what opportunities are there for us, and what are the implications of immigration to the country that one migrates to. In the United States, as you have seen, there is a lot of conversation going on. And I think Mr. Trump has made it very clear that he wants merit-based immigration. He wants to build a wall. And he has also propounded a theory which says that if there is no border, if there is no wall, we don't have a country. Now that throws up another issue of the concept of open borders versus nation states, and how does it all affect? Now here is a thought that occurred to me while I was driving up to the studio, that I looked at India as a country where we belong to, and that's where we came from. India has a philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The whole world is a village. If the whole world is a village, then why should anybody have any problem in moving one place to another? And India, historically, the peak of its economic power was controlling 36% of the world trade, and a very prosperous region. It was called Bharatvarsh. It was not called India many years ago. So the Dutch, the Muslims, the East India Company that came to India, they did not come for the purpose of benefiting India. They came for trade and commerce. The Mughals came to conquer the rich territory, and India assimilated everybody. It has assimilated even the persecuted religions of the world, home to Zoroastrians, the Parsis as we know it. So it has been a very interesting scenario, and I was comparing that. Is that what is happening in the United States now? Is it worried that an overflow of immigration can affect the dynamics of politics, society, social, cultural? Everything plays a very critical role. Now here is a very important point again. I came to this country in 1991 as a legal resident, became a citizen thereafter. And ever since then, I have been hearing about comprehensive immigration reform. The last any such effort was made was in 1986 or so. Ever since then, there has been one presidential executive order or the other, which has kind of really made the entire immigration as a political jingoism. At the same time, it is also very important to remember that immigration impacts the people who migrate. They affect the lives of people who they compete with. It's a very interesting psychological challenge. It's a very selfish individual effort. So when you come here, somebody else doesn't get that spot because there's a quota, there is a restriction on how many people can come. The current statistics is very fascinating. In the last 10 years or so, more than 800,000 Indians have come here. And currently, as we will talk about that later, the various categories of immigrations, whether it's family-based or it is employment-based, India has a massive backlog. So what opportunities do we have? What opportunities do Indians have to come here? And redrawing the map, which is very important. So we will open the dialogue with the need for comprehensive immigration reform in India. We have in the studio today two panelists, two legal luminaries in the area of immigration. One is Mr. Sanjay Chaubey. He has his own company, Sanjay Law Firm, and also Mr. Viswanath, who I suppose the ITV viewers know very well. Welcome, Dave, and welcome, Chaubey.
Thank you, Mr.
So with this, what I wanted to mention this to you also is that comprehensive immigration reform needs to address 3 or 4 key issues. One is border security, national security, safety of people who are already here. The second one is, how do you determine who comes here, the skilled, the not so skilled? The third one is, how does it impact the cultural milieu of the society? So what we will start with is, how does it affect the comprehensive reform? And given the current imbroglio on safety, terrorism, what do we do about it that can have an impact? Sanjay ji, what about you starting with that?
Sure, Vibhuti ji. First and foremost, thank you for having us here. Comprehensive immigration reform, this conversation actually started somewhere just after 9/11, because we recognize that some of the culprits in that were on visa, and immigration had not scrutinized those the way it should have to find that there is a potential people who can harm this country. Prior to that, if you go a little back, we had always a system where people were evaluated based on their skill set, qualification, and that were the categories the immigrants were coming. But unfortunately, after Reagan's amnesty, where thousands and hundreds of thousands people got a green card based on their illegal entry to United States, during the Clinton era, Immigration Reform and Responsibility Act came, which provided that if you entered United States illegally, even if you marry a US citizen, you cannot become a green card holder. This was to discourage people just crossing the border and entering United States with the hope that based on a labor certification, a employer based or marriage based, they can get waiver with their illegal entry. That is one of the things that 245I, which was removed, came in while President Clinton was going out somewhere around 22nd of December, but the window given for that was only up to 30th of April. So that legitimized some of the people who entered United States illegally, but to date there is no other provision which will grant such green card or permanency for people who cross the border without inspection. This is the background which I wanted to lay down to understand that why we need comprehensive immigration reform. Now, we know from the data that around more than 10 million people in this country are illegally here, who have no record of their entry to United States. They were not inspected. Basically, comprehensive immigration reform is going to address the issue of that big a population which is in the country, but we do not have any control over them. It was very well, thought about, and now Senator McCain is no more, nor Edward Kennedy is there. It was a bipartisan act where Kennedy and McCain worked together and created a mechanism and a legislation which fairly I had the opportunity to read the draft, and I found it was very well written, and it could have provided results to our broken immigration system right now.
Talking about the broken immigration system, now this is, every politician says the same thing. Every immigration attorney who I see on the television, they talk about US immigration system is broken. I sometimes wonder what exactly is broken. If the Constitution can withstand 200 years of founding fathers' wisdom, what happened in the immigration reform or immigration challenge? So here is a very important issue. Immigration is need-based. The country, look at it, United States. We belong to two of the most important democracies in the world. India, the largest, United States, the oldest. Both have very strong institutional framework. The issue with India and difference between India and the United States is very important. United States is 3 times larger than India, has 1/4 the population, and it is a resource-rich country. As a result of which, it is definitely a magnet for the world to move here. It can absorb people. At the same time, the immigration requirements of United States have to be determined by United States. It's not about any more, give me your poor, give me your downtrodden. That is a compassionate issue, which is definitely there. I'm not undermining that. We are all immigrants in this country, so we cannot be against immigration. But we as citizens have to begin to think about it. Who comes here? So right now, Dave, I would like to talk to you about the fact that in the year in another 15, 20 years from now, United States will need 35.3 million people to support sustain its economic. Just they require filling in the gaps. 65,000 baby boomers retire every day. So that is just filling in the gap.
Right.
And
Indians
that is
aren't
not
gonna-
in addition to taking into account the economic growth factor.
Right.
So what must happen in the immigration reform? Does the United States have a right to determine who comes here and who doesn't, or let everybody come because we can afford to? That's a big challenge. So,
Well, Vibhuti ji, thank you for having me here. I'm glad to be with Mr. Chaubey as well. I think first of all, we have to deal with the issue that, of course, the government has the right, any country, any sovereign nation has the right to determine who's going to be coming in and who's not. I think the other issue that's interesting from an anthropological perspective is that they talk about how many countries in the world are suffering from the fact that children aren't being born, young people aren't there, there's no workforce. The United States has managed to sustain itself largely because of immigration influx, because immigrants often do have families. If you look at most of Europe, if you look at Japan, they're struggling now. Canada is starting to struggle because people are not having, I think the UN, they put a number out of like 2.2 is like what you need to sustain yourself. And in Europe, it's well under, it's like 1.4 children per family or something like that. So that in itself talks about, just from a purely factual perspective, if you don't have the numbers, you're not going to be able to sustain your society. Now we get into things like healthcare. Now we get into things like workforce. Now we get into things like Social Security. If you don't have people to pay into the Social Security system, then we need to fix it. If we don't have people to pay for those things, then healthcare is going to blow up. Now we talk about the other issue, which is the new kid on the block, right? It could have been the Irish, it could have been the Italians. Then it became, other groups. Then Indians came in. The new kid on the block who starts taking up the jobs, who starts moving into the areas, becomes a conflict-ridden problem for the local populace, And as they become second and third generation groups, often they join that local populace against the new guy who comes in. It's just a nature, a natural effect. It happens all over the world. Even in India today, you can see groups in Maharashtra, we've had it, in Karnataka we've had it, where new groups start coming in and all of a sudden the people, the local population, start feeling like they're losing jobs and they start going crazy over it. And then you have politics fall in, where they say things like, oh, well, look, it's a good populist stance, so I'm going to take it. Let's try to remove these people from the area. Let's curb their influx. When we're talking about comprehensive immigration reform, two great examples of how it's broken are what's called a labor certification process. And I would say on the family side of things, we'll talk about family-based immigration, brothers and sister category, okay? On the one hand, with labor certifications, what is a labor certification? It's the first step in employment-based immigration. And it says that we're going to recruit all across the United States. We're going to see if there's anybody that's qualified, minimally qualified for a particular job that an employer has. And we're going to hopefully not find, hopefully, because an employer usually knows who they want to hire, not find somebody for that particular job. And then the Department of Labor has to certify, yes, it's true. You've recruited across the country. You've not found anybody that's suitable for the job, and go ahead and move forward with the person that you have in mind because he is qualified for the job. It's an inundated and crazy system. An employer should be able to hire who they want to hire and move forward with the process. But in order to protect the local populace, they have this labor certification process. And it doesn't make sense. On the family-based side of things, because of national quotas, at this day, if you're from the Philippines and you file for your brother or sister, you're going to be waiting 25, 30 years. If you're from India, you're going to be waiting 12 or 14 years. That also has an impact because what you have is brothers and sisters who come from different categories of education many times, and they also bring their families with them.
And that is a very important point, which is what Mr. Trump is hitting at, is a family-based immigration. So, for example, in 2016, 1.2 million people were granted residency in the United States. More than 2/3 were family-based. And remaining about 12% was employment-based. 3% was asylum seekers. 12% were people who were, diversity part of it. The point which I'm trying to make is that determining the quality of people and who comes in, and it's a very important part. You talk about broken system. It is perhaps because of There are 4 million applications waiting in the State Department to be approved, people waiting in line. But when you have 11 million people who are entered the country illegally, it has a very different kind of an impact because those 4 million people get delayed. So it is a law-abiding country. The country has to be, we talk about it all the time, we are a country of laws. So when people who break the laws and come here, how do we take care of that challenge? Because you can't deport 12 million people. So how does that assimilation happen? Because immigration is a problem of assimilation, not about no immigrant comes here to contribute to the economy of that specific country. Let's face the truth the way it is. Immigration happens for 3 reasons. One is people seeking economic opportunities. Second, when they are running away from political challenges in their own residence. And third is a category where people are travelers who are going for higher education, or people going to Nalanda University of the time, or people traveling to various parts to explore. Those were a different category of people. They were not migrants. They were seekers and travelers. So at this point in time, as we talk about this matter, how does one understand the challenge and what do we need to do about that?
You are asking me from the government point of view or from a practitioner's point of view?
Tell me both.
Okay.
We are a program which is about frankly speaking, and one of the things which I have conceived in this thought is do not hesitate to say express yourself, because it's telling the truth, because truth cannot become victim of our machinations or what we say or do. So I would urge you to speak from the practical point of view, your point of view, your business point of view, people point of view, and what must happen.
This is something very good and philosophical argument which you have made. But from the government point of view, I would highlight that United States had been from time to time taking extreme and severe measures to stop or block entry of particular race, group, or people. We can go back as in the early 19s when Chinese exclusion came in. After that, my understanding is that after the Pearl Harbor issue, all the Japanese were put to the intermittent camps. After that, very recently, if you want to see that we had Guantanamo Bay, and we got people who were involved in sentiment even against United States. We kept several thousand people in that. So we have been, as a government and as a machinery, executive machinery, have been blocking people from coming to United States. Now the evolution of this, as you rightly pointed, whenever we needed a workforce, we came out with some legislation to open that. After Vietnam War, we suffered major injury and death in that war, which resulted in need of too many healthcare, especially nurses. And from all over the world, nurses were brought in without even examination or language test, so that they can take care of the fallen or injured veterans in United States. Thereafter, when EPA came in 70s during President Nixon times, we needed civil engineers and other engineers to go for the RECRA sites and others. And that was the time, if you see, lot of engineers who were qualified and practicing were brought in United States without even PE exam to conduct engineering work sites in the United States. Thereafter, I'm giving you an evolutionary way that from 30s to 40s to 50s to 70s.
While you give me the history of it, which is great from the research point of view, what I would also want you to comment upon the issue, the challenges as it exists today, and that would be
very close.
That would be important for current generation. What happened in the 30s, it doesn't matter.
No, I was
but when we
giving
are
a
trying
chronology.
to yes. So
in 90s, when we realized that our computers may fail of Y2K effect, we needed computer programmers and computer engineers who could fix the entire computer systems which we had got at that time. That was the time when we explored the H-1B and brought so many engineers from all over the world, but majority of that came from India. Now the issue with the H-1B, because which we are currently facing two issues. One is immigrant visa issues, which you discussed. One is non-immigrant visa issues. We become immigrant only, majority of people come on non-immigrant visas like student visas or work visas, and then they convert it to immigrant visa. We will touch base on immigrant visa problems later, but first non-immigrant visa, H-1B, L-1 and others, what they are facing problem is following. In February 2018, INS has been issuing memos after memo that how you should conduct your business basically. A memo came about third-party placement of H-1B employees. Now it is impossible for an employer to not to place employee at the work site third party. Against that, a lawsuit has been filed in first of May 2018 by Mr. Wasden, who is the attorney, on behalf of small and medium entrepreneurs against DHS, because this memo is impossible for H-1B employees, and everybody knows here every day hundreds of H-1B candidates are going back after spending several years in this country because they cannot meet that discretion. Basically, what government has done, it has gone beyond their scope of jurisdiction. There are two issues. There is Department of Labor, which is one mechanism of government, and there is USCIS, which is the second. In a H-1B visa, the first test is given by the Department of Labor, which sees where the employee will work, what are the hours, how much he will get paid, and what is the nature of the job. Once they give you LCA, then INS has no authority to challenge that. But here, when third-party placements are being challenged, they are overreaching the Department of Labor. And this lawsuit, which I discussed with you, was about that whether in a mandamus petition, whether the government's two bodies can overreach each other. Here what we have understood is basically immigration is saying that don't bring white collar jobs to this country. The agenda.
Wait. So are we talking about that the US government is now contemplating not bringing white collar jobs? If that is the case, then how will 35.3 million jobs that will be required to be replaced ever happen?
Well, hopefully it'll be those people who've already gotten here and those children who grow up and become white-collar, individuals. I think there's a point there that I just want to bring up in the recent history, which is that when President Bush was a proponent of comprehensive immigration reform. Right. We've had, and there's been, similar to what Mr. Chaubey was saying, there has been a bill that's been sort of mutated a little bit over the years, but consistently before each president. President Trump has sort of decided to keep that bill off the table, and there's been arguments among certain individuals within legislature whether to do immigration on a piecemeal or whether to do comprehensive. Like, let's just work on the borders, let's just work on the students, we'll give you that. But a lot of advocates say if you only work in piecemeal, then you'll forget about millions and millions of people, and that'll never get done, which is one of the reasons. I mean, there are people today that say, look, we will sign off on giving students green cards. We will sign off on giving you maybe a few more H-1s in the work sector. We want a strong border, so we have to work on deportation and defense, right? But we're not going to give you those 10 million people that are undocumented. We're not going to worry about family members. Let's kill the brother-sister category. And that's become a really interesting topic. But one of the things that I want to say is that with H-1B, again, 9/11 occurred, so that's one issue. But under President Bush, we had seen a lower number of H-1Bs. There was a decline in the number of H-1Bs and an increase in outsourcing to India. Okay, and then under President Obama, around 2012, we started to see it. 2010, 2011, 2012, we started to see the increase in H-1Bs again. And also we noticed some changes in certain sectors of the economy. But and then back to 2012, where we had finished the H-1B quota within the first 2 or 3 months, and now we're back to on the first week, finishing out. Now we're back to another president, which is President Trump. And what I am noticing, and I don't know exactly if that's the complete direction, but based on his rhetoric and based on some of the direction of the way the country's going, I think we will see a decrease in H-1Bs for a variety of reasons and an increase in outsourcing. People have already realized that outsourcing is a good thing. Prime Minister Modi sees that as a great thing. Keep our brains here in India. Let's increase our businesses here in India, and half the stuff those guys are doing there while they're spending American
Prime
money.
Minister Modi is very keen that Indians develop the skill to international standards so that Indians can go out and work. In addition to making successful employment opportunities within the country, because unless and until you are qualified with this international standards, you can't get jobs outside. But that also brings about one of the things which continuously bothers me as an immigrant, is that nobody knows as of now what is the exact requirement, of jobs. This is something which, people blame, political dialogue also is about, that the employers prefer these illegal guys because they come cheap and they don't advertise, they don't know what jobs can be filled in.
And they're harder working.
And they're hard working. So the question is, how does one attend to that emotional issue, psychological issue, and everything else that goes with it? What is the role of the employer in this aspect, that he says, I need these kind of people and they are not available in the United States? Or it is supporting the education system in the US that it makes people go for the job? Because a lot of times people say, oh, Mexicans do the fruit picking and everything else because the US guys will not do. But look at what has happened in the employment situation in the last 2 years since not 2 years, since Trump took over, the unemployment rate has fallen to 3.9%. That means people are working. There is something which is not clear.
They're still not picking the strawberries.
Still not picking the whole thing. So the question here is, how does that get addressed? Your thoughts?
If you had Americans doing many of those jobs, and we had to go by minimum wage standards in a lot of those places, the cost for things like a slice of pizza I always say most restaurants all across the United States in major cities are employing undocumented workers. That's just...
Well, with these thoughts, I will want you
speaking.
to hold on to it. And I want to thank you for staying put. Stay for these short commercial breaks, and we will be back to discuss certain very important issues, what today India must do or Indians must do, because this is an Indian program. We will talk about opportunities available to Indians, what to do about that. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. In this segment, I wanted to share with you a personal experience of mine. Several years ago, when I was new in this country, I met with a very prominent senator here, or was he a congressman? Not exactly recall. And he talked about immigration, about Indians, and he said something which was very fascinating, which made me proud, and I think it must make every Indian proud in this country. He said, we Americans love you Indians coming as immigrants. You are educated, you have family values, you take care of your family, you work hard, you have highest median income, you are least problem on the legal law side or legal side, and you don't commit crimes, and you don't ask for anything. So the question here was that they love Indians as immigrants, but the opportunities are gradually becoming longer and longer. Every Indian wants to come to America, and it is a land of opportunity, no doubt. But the important challenge is what opportunities are there. I recently came to know that a lot of H-1B category people began to use the employment skill-based EB2, EB3 categories as migration from H1 to, because that was happening faster. Now that also has a backlog of 10 years. Green card, H1B to green card is more than 12. Sometimes newspaper reports talk about 99 years for getting it. Family-based is also an issue. So India, people in India, what categories are available to them is something that I would like you to talk about. In my impression of things, what I came to know was EB5, EB1, these were open categories. There are still possibilities. EB1 has gotten tight, but EB5 is an opportunity available, and marrying a local citizen. Now that is not going to happen until you indulge in get shadi.com or whatever. But how do Indians take advantage of that? What would you like to say about that, Sanjay? If people in India are listening to you and their family members are here, what must they do?
Jokingly, I had said that these are the two categories which are open and current. You see, either you have to be rich from any standard to invest minimum 500,000, $500,000 or $1 million to qualify for EB5. And what my guess is that in coming months, there could be amendment and which may increase the amount of 500 to 800,000, and maybe $1 million becomes $1.5 million. So those who have, all these monetary resources, they can plan for EB5 visa from India. But those who do not have, and they have some, the marriage, I say always that it should not be a fraudulent marriage or marriage contracted only for the purposes of green card. So if it is a good faith marriage or first degree, you are parent or a child. I have done personally a visa for a doctor whose son was born here, and he has become 21, and doctor and doctor's wife both are qualified MD, and they have done their work here, they are licensed. They want now to come back, so we are doing their visas from United States as a parents of a US citizen. So these are the only categories right now open, but Dave had very interestingly mentioned about the entrepreneurial visa, which is available for entrepreneurs, and I think Dave will address that.
Would you like to talk about that?
Sure.
Because in addition to, for the purposes of full disclosure, I have significant interest in EB5 because we are running two projects in New England and in Rhode Island. So that said, but EB5 is a clear opportunity globally. We have seminars happening every day in India and other places, and people are taking advantage of that, those who can afford to do that. So talk about both your experience about EB5 as well as the program that you talked about.
Sure. Well, I guess we'll talk about entrepreneurial parole, and then we'll talk about EB5.
Sure.
But entrepreneurial parole is something that was created as a sort of go around that was very politically motivated, but it was to fix something that Congress was not able to in some ways. And my belief is that, so full disclosure, my belief is that it was created for people from the Silicon Valley area. Indians are not privy to investment visas, the non-immigrant investment visa or trader visa, the E1 or E2. So entrepreneurial parole was based on the idea that if you had a company that was benefiting the US government in some way, and you had an investment of about $250,000, then you could get what's called a parole into the United States for up to 5 years, and it could be renewed. There was no limitation to the parole.
What happens to people who come on parole? Do they get the
It's not really status. That's the interesting thing. You are allowed to be here, your families are allowed to be here, but you really don't have a particular status, like a visa status. You're paroled into the United States. Now, one of the effects of that is also that it limits the type of permanent migration you might be able to do. You know what I mean? These are for people that have no real interest. The way it was created was that they are going to come here, they may work here for long periods of time, but it's to develop their business, and it helps the US government.
And they go back.
And they go back.
But what happens to the business when they go back?
Well, so the idea is that you bring up the business. Look, real business people can come here on business B1 visas and see their business as it's growing and continue to move back and forth. So the idea here is you almost like an L1A, an intercompany transfer. I have a company in some other country, or India. I come to the United States. I develop a subsidiary of that company. After some time, the idea is that I go back to my own country and I come in to see my company whenever I need to. So this entrepreneurial parole was to develop that aspect of the business, but not meant to create a mainstay for people. So it has not developed very largely, partially because one, it's not status per se. Two, some people don't understand it. In fact, I've spoken with consular officers, including in Mumbai, who were not even very aware of it. I mean, they said point blank, I've never even seen an entrepreneurial parole.
Right.
Now, it makes sense why they may not, because parole is granted by DHS. So it's not something that they would often see through the consulate.
And parole by itself is a very interesting word.
Right, you may not want to hear it.
You may not want to be on parole. If somebody you tell, how come you are in the US? Oh, I'm on a parole. Okay,
Right.
all right. That has a very dangerous connotation.
Right.
English is a funny language, and
It
certain
is.
words can play devilish with you.
Oh,
Switching over to EB5.
yes.
Now that's based on my experience. Is
Yes.
that EB5 offers opportunity for students from India to escape all the stress, tension of getting admission in schools, and they also become extension of business
Right.
for their
Right.
families with status.
Right.
Your thoughts on that?
EB5 is a fantastic program for those who have the funds and can trace those funds. Okay, why? Because it's a fast track to a green card in many ways.
Yeah.
And now they allow, before it could only be done if you were a minor, it could only be done through your parents. So people who had no real major intention of coming to the United States had to apply for a green card and then bring their child in. The United States government has done away with that now. So a parent who has a child who's not interested in remaining in India permanently can take their investment for their child's egg and essentially put the money in their child's name to allow them to come over on EB5. Now, there are two ways to look at that. One is that if you do an EB5 for yourself, your wife, and your child, you maximize the $500,000. But if you're doing it for your individual child, obviously, usually they're not married or any of that stuff. So, but then you take away the issue of getting subject to U.S. taxes. You take away getting subject to coming to the United States simply to give up your green card. Those are aspects to it that are different. The EB5 allows not only that, but it also allows you to, as you rightly said, do business anywhere else. You can live anywhere else in the country. You can do work in any other business. In fact, with EB5, you're not even required to know much about the company that you're doing business in. Know the basics about it. You're not making any decisions on it. So it's a perfect sort of passive way to invest. Now, the law says that it has to be at-risk investment, so that's one of the things that comes up. People understand that my principal of $500,000 is going into a business that may rise or may fail. So one of the things that people who are applying for EB5 will do is look at what's the stability in it. Most people will say at this point, I don't care about gaining lots of money after my 5 or 8 years. I care about getting back my principal.
Yes.
If you can show me that I'll get back my principal in a relatively secure way, that's for me.
No, based on my experience of EB5, I can tell you, because we have handled 2 projects, we are looking at it, is that investor concern is about 2 things. How do I get is my money safe, and how do I get it back? Or am I making some return on that? So there are hundreds of projects in the US, and that is what is important to determine. If the project is stabilized, has good possibility of surviving, you have a good opportunity to do that, because projects have to provide for safety of funds, and how you create that net is important. So when you apply for EB5 and look at projects, look at what is the asset collateralization that enables you return your funds, as well as an ongoing business. It's actually a win-win situation for everybody. US government has a plan that in remote areas, you create 10 jobs. That is a key element of your investment in that. So you could invest $500,000, that $500,000 must create 10 jobs and 10 permanent jobs. As a result of which the economy of that area develops, and as a result of which you get some return, you get your green card accelerated, and everybody wins. It's a real classic win-win scenario for US, the investment and the immigrant. So talking about EB5 again,
Yes.
what hesitates, or what is it that makes Indians hesitated to take that step? Chinese made use of this as if there was no tomorrow, and they took care of the 10,000 visas, more than 9,000. Indians have just started waking up. Is it because of lack of knowledge, lack of awareness, or just because we Indians take time to take a decision?
what you said, all the three are the right, options which you gave. The first thing is that compared to Chinese, India has an issue because of the property prices falling in India. Legitimacy of money. First criteria is to show that this is the legit money. It is not, from any other source, and this is my money. This was a problem in India before demonetization also, because of the parallel economy, which we call black money, was too much, and people were not knowing how to show, and they were wary of that there will be investigation and people will know that how I have collected $500,000. That we have come across. There are many people who have loads of money and they have all legitimate money, so that's not an issue anymore. The second issue was, as you said, and as they've also pointed out, they are more interested in knowing that whether my money at risk is safe enough to get my capital back. The third thing which we have realized in the case of China also, they want to see the collateral part which you said. So if you are investing in a building, a hotel, motel, or a housing, they still feel that if something goes wrong, they have a brick mortar building to claim from that. Exactly what third point was, that 9,000 visas China was taking and India was still hesitant whether to come or not. I think there were many more avenues to come to United States with the L1 visa, H1 visa, student visa. Now Indians are finding that all these three categories which were available have become very tight. Anybody who had a child, if he came to do his master's, it was granted that after master's he will get a job and employer will sponsor him for I-140 and he will get a green card. But now more students are made to go back. Even in the optional practical training, the rules have been tightened. Everybody is not able to prove that they are in a similar employment what they were educated for, and they have to go back. So now Indians are, for the best of their children and their families, they are taking step of coming up and applying for EB-5 program.
Talking about EB-5, let's switch over to the political impact and the politicians' play, how they treat immigration as an issue. So now let's look at it this way. That people want to come to the United States, there is no doubt about that. It is a great country, offers awesome opportunities to everybody. But the politics of it has become very tricky. If I have seen this from President Bill Clinton's address in presidential address, as well as Bush, Obama, and Trump. They have all talked about illegal immigration as a major challenge. They were all Democrats. Obama and Clinton, Hillary Clinton, aspirational presidential candidate, then Bush. And when Trump talks about that, it has become an evil part of it. Would you like to comment on the political element of the thing, that why, when the same thing Trump says becomes absolutely as if somebody has caught a hot stone in his hand.
Right.
But when Clinton, Hillary, both Bill and Hillary,
right,
as well as Barack Obama, President Obama, made a scathing attack on illegal immigration.
Right.
You are not going to come here.
Right.
Why is it an issue when Trump says it?
Right.
Why was it not an issue previously?
Right.
Yeah, frankly speaking.
Frankly speaking, President Trump is a divisive individual, and he uses polarization and popular thought to gain support. That's just the bottom line. And if you want to talk about things in a way that, many of the times when those people talked about undocumented workers or illegal immigration, they talked about it as if people could come to the table and discuss the matter. President Trump talks about it as an absolute and says it's wrong, and then he uses words that create anger. I've said this before to many people. He's just not a happy guy. He's not a guy that inspires positivity. He's a man who looks at them and us, whatever the subject, them and us. You don't like this, that's because you're wrong. You don't want to be here because something's wrong with you, not us.
My personal take on that is, if Trump could be politically as savvy as President Obama, the country would be in a real good scenario. Because he's a great economic manager, because he has done awesome with the economy. 4.2% growth, 4.4 twice, 2 quarters. So he's done well with the economy in terms of everything else, but his choice of words is, of course, dangerous. If he were only as smart as Obama, I think, you know, United States needs a combination of both Obama and Trump to be a very great country.
You know, when you talk about the idea of what makes them different, I think that's the main issue when you're talking about something as specific as undocumented workers.
Right.
I mean, if you have things like the op-ed article that talks about people in his own cabin and people in his own White House that are doing things to protect the country from him, if you have people writing books where they're interviewing people from the White House that talk about the ways in which he enrages his own people, that's a concern.
I'm totally with you on that, because politics is an art of creating allies, alliances,
that's it.
Inclusiveness. And Trump somehow doesn't know that language at all. As a result of which, despite doing well on economy, he antagonizes more people, you know, in his party as well as elsewhere. So the question here is, again, very important, is that what is the difference between the political thing, Republican Party, Democratic Party, comprehensive reform? Is national security, terrorism, real issue, or is it an issue made out to be what it is? I think, in my opinion, terror protection of the citizens remains an important thing to address too.
It is very important, and like I'm continuing Dave's thought, what it was that we, you know, this administration, I call, has given a very clear agenda. Made in America, hire Americans. When we say, you see, you have raised such an economic and socio issue so good that we are trying to do how to make manufacturing base come back in United States by, you know, raising tariff in China, which we are trying to do, that if Chinese goods will not come, somehow we will create here or start manufacturing. Second agenda is to hire American, for which we had gone through 9 yards of H-1B and others, that how we can stop people coming to United States, whether legal immigration or illegal immigration, which will give opportunity to job seekers here in United States. So this is a political agenda. But what you said, that how to control security threats who are coming to United States. Recently, 3 days back, the refugee quota has been reduced to 30,000. Because right now we are receiving refugees from Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, all these places which we are not very sure that under the garb of refugees we may receive some people who are not good for this country. I don't call them terrorists, but very opinionated people. So that's one another aspect of looking at it.
Yeah. The other part also very important. Now we have clearly 3 more minutes to go in this. So wanted you to quickly comment upon the economic and social cultural impact of immigration. What my thought process is that majority of the immigrants who come here, they're hardworking people. You know, industrial statistics, 87 privately held companies, valuation of $1 billion, 51% were started by immigrants.
Right.
So that is a direct contribution to the US economy coming from them. So the question arises then is that, do they bring about a cultural shift? This is the way I was. Satya Nadella and others are examples that how they turned around Microsoft by using certain philosophies brought from India.
Right.
At the same time, we have also issues on the cultural part. When people come here, they don't assimilate. The integration is the issue here. I am the way I am, this is the way I was, and this is the way I will remain. Your thoughts on that? How will that help? As the saying goes, while in Rome, be like Romans.
Right.
But if you want to put your own flag the way I am, this is the way I will be, how does that? Does that help or does it hinder? So what will be your advice to people who come to you on cultural integration?
Well, you know, first I'll say that, you know, when you don't travel 9,000 miles to just do nothing.
Right.
You know, if you come from countries that are very, very far away, you're coming here usually with a purpose and you want to accomplish that purpose. You know, it doesn't always work out, but that's generally the way people look at it. Now when we talk about the issue of assimilation and cultural connections, I mean, the reality of things is we are a hodgepodge of cultures, right? I mean, pizza, everybody eats pizza, and half the people who make pizza aren't Italian, you know? Chinese food, noodles, you know? So the idea of Indians, and I will say that Indians and maybe even more particularly Hindus and Eastern philosophy have taken root in corporate culture,
Right.
largely because of the success of these CEOs and these managers who have come in and brought their philosophy about things. There's that idea of mixing the Occident and the Orient together, you know, management style of the Occident, the Westerner, with the philosophical style of the Orient, you know, and I think that's the cultural impact on business comes from that end. And then when, you know, you look at London, chicken tikka masala is one of the most popular dishes there.
Talking about that, the time is up.
Yep.
But before I end, I just wanted to add one experience of mine. Participating in a human potential conference hosted by Economist magazine, there was a very famous professor from London School of Business, and she opined on the stage that this time has come from the West for the Western companies to recognize that money is not the only motivator, and that the people need more than money. And that's the time when I said it's time for the West to accept certain Eastern wisdom as well. So if we combine Eastern wisdom with material elements of this, there is always an evolution. We learn, we become something different, we become better. So immigration has very positive impacts. We are all examples of that. We have done well, we have worked hard. Thank you for being with us. I want to thank my panelists, Chaubey ji and Dave. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for being with us. Have a wonderful day. See you next week for another edition with something very important for all of us.